Hello everybody. We're now working on the preliminary exercises for our project number 7 on pattern. This is a project that involves a concept known as tessellation. And tessellation essentially is a way of creating shapes essentially as tiles that are intersecting, that fit into one another, almost like puzzle pieces. And they're created from shapes that would fit perfectly inside of a circle. So the types of shapes that work for this type of work would be squares, equilateral triangles, and hexagons. So you want to make sure that you're working only with those three shapes. So in this example, we're starting from a square tile. And what we're doing here is known as a two-step translation tessellation. So in this case, from the bottom edge of my square, I've taken out a shape, basically a triangle. You see that shape set to the side here. I'm going to take that shape from the bottom and attach it directly across from itself on the opposite side. So this shape is now here. So you can see already how this would notch into this negative space and create a perfectly repeating pattern up and down. We're doing a two-step translation, so I'm also going to take a cut from the left-hand side. That's also sort of a triangular shape. You see that here. And I'm going to attach it on the opposite side of the square from where I cut it. So I cut it from the left, I'm going to attach it to the right vertical side. So the cut from here has now been attached to this side. So you can see in this bottom section how those shapes fit one into the other to create a regular repeating pattern. So that's one of the types that you'll be working on your preliminary exercises. You're going to work on creating this essentially basic tile. I would recommend doing it by cutting it physically from something stiff like a piece of Bristol board or perhaps from mat board. And you can see here in my example, you can actually see the original edge of my square. You can see where I cut those pieces out and then taped them together to create this shape. I was going for something that looked kind of like a fish. In my head, this looked kind of like the fin on the top. Here's the face. And then this shape kind of equates to the tail. So that was sort of the basic idea. In your preliminary exercises, you'll be creating 3 variations of this basic shape. You don't have to make it absolutely perfect. They don't have to perfectly tessellate, but a quick sketch to give an idea of how you might transform your basic idea into something anthropomorphic, something that looks like a living thing, an animal, or perhaps a person. This is the second vertical column. And in this one, again, we're working from squares. These are going to be rotation tessellations. So again, we're starting with a square shape, and I'm taking a cut from that left-hand side. And to make your life a little bit easier, I would actually recommend on this type, cutting the entire side, something that will cut from the top to that bottom corner. So here's that shape that we're looking at that was cut from this side, and I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to flip it up on this corner and attach it not directly across from the left-hand side where I cut it to the right, but rather from the left-hand side where it was cut to the top. So you can see it creates this new form here. I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. I'm going to cut a section, and this went again from corner to corner. I kind of cut a bit of that entire side off. That's the shape there, essentially a triangle. And I'm going to flip it, this time this way, to align that long straight edge with the straight edge here, and it creates this effect on this side. Again, in the pattern below, you can see how the shape rotates around itself. It creates a kind of interesting dynamic pattern. If you look at this section right here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 units that are identical rotating around that same point. This shape, to me, once I cut it, I was able to start imagining different forms within it. On this one, I didn't have a plan ahead of time, but as I cut it, I thought it kind of looked like a beak and perhaps the wattle on a rooster, and maybe this could be the comb. So that was sort of the idea that I was going to work with in my variations. The last column asks you to work with something other than a square, in this case, a hexagon, or it could be an equilateral triangle. This is the easier of the hexagon translations to do. This is a tessellation that uses translation directly across a center line. So here's my original hexagon. I'm taking a simple cut here along this side, and I'm going to take that shape and attach it directly across on a diagonal across from the original side. So from this side, I'm attaching to here. I'm going to create the same effect on the opposite side. I'm going to go from here, taking this cut out, and I'm going to attach it to this bottom edge here, creating this new strange form. I'll do one last cut, and that's from the original top edge, this sort of truncated triangle form, which I'm then going to attach directly across from it on the bottom. So you see that piece that was here is now extended here. And that allows this to operate as a tessellation, much like a checkerboard, just side to side, top to bottom, left to right. It repeats without rotating. So in this case, I was aiming for something that would look perhaps like a dragon. So I was imagining these as either horns, ears, and these perhaps as some kind of beard underneath the teeth. So here's what you're doing. There's your three basic tessellating tiles. And then in each column below that, you're going to try to transform it into some sort of anthropomorphic image. Now, again, these are not absolutely perfect. These are quick sketches to give myself an idea. But there you can see my original fish plan. I also thought it kind of looked in profile a bit like the shape of a frog. And I tried to go for some sort of snake-like or alien monster mouth in this version. I still like the rooster shape the best in this example, but I also tried rotating the tile in different orientations. And so the shape that was the beak, if I turned it around the other way, became kind of this cartoon-like nose. So I was kind of going for a detective idea, sort of a rain slick coat and hat and a mustache here on this big nose. The last rotation that I did sort of suggested the shape of a bat to me. I don't think it's absolutely ideal, but it does give you a variation on this basic form. This was a little more straightforward with my simple three-step translation tessellation from a hexagon. I was aiming for this kind of dragon idea, but I transformed it here into some sort of coyote or wolf, and again into some sort of cat or lion form. There are a handful of other tessellations that you might want to try. The triangle is a pretty interesting one. Then this is a two-step process that will result in a rotating design. In this case, I cut along the left-hand edge of this equilateral triangle. So I have the whole of that side. I'm then going to put it on this opposite side here, directly across on the right-hand side. On the bottom, you notice I took a snip out, but only halfway. It goes from the original corner to the halfway point, and then flips so that it attaches flat side to create this form. And once that was completed, I started tracing it to see what it looked like, to see how it would create a pattern, and it does make kind of a nice floral shape. But I also thought that the tile itself looked a bit like a bird, maybe a hummingbird. So you can start to make the shapes, really the tessellation tiles, and then decide what you could abstract them into as a second step. Probably the most challenging type are the hexagons that rotate. And these are the type that really M.C. Escher is best known for. If you know his famous salamander design, it's really based on this concept. So again, you need to make sure that you are working with a true hexagon, as you see here. That hexagon would fit perfectly inside of a circle. And you'll notice that I'm taking a snip, in this case, from this side, but it includes that corner. And I'm then rotating the piece so that that corner edge here, where you see that little star, matches up with this star and extends the shape outward. So from this left-hand edge to the top, I then worked from the bottom edge to the right. I took this snip, and you notice that's the point that's going to rotate. And here that extends outward, adding this section. And my final one was from this left-hand edge to directly beneath itself, the shape that looks a little bit like a butterfly wing or a letter B. That dot is the point that's going to rotate, so the narrower part of the B will extend upward here, And that's in fact the shape that we have here. So you can see how these pieces neatly come together as a rotating design. I thought maybe I could abstract this in some way into perhaps a cowboy hat, some form of human figure in there, maybe. The one I was most pleased with personally, though, is this one. And in this case, again, I'm doing a rotation from a hexagon. So here's my original hexagon shape, my first snip that includes this corner, and there's the dot where it's rotating. So it extends outward, forming this additional element. Then I went onto my upper left-hand side, took that snip, rotated it on this point, and attached it to the top, extending this sort of crown effect here. And then the last section would be to take a section from here and rotate it to this side. We only have two sides we haven't manipulated yet. I took a more arabesque shape, a more complex form. That is the point that it'll rotate on. And you can see when that extends outward, it creates this effect here. So if you look at this angle, that piece we just added, you can see it rotating around itself. There's the missing negative space for one more head, another section there, another there. And as I turned it around, I realized that this actually really looks a lot like a bird, maybe a phoenix. So this could be something that I could really work with in terms of creating an interesting design for the final project. So again, this is hopefully what you'll end up with. You'll have 3 tiles that you create, and then beneath each tile, variations of what they could be transformed into.